Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm a specialist in the Old Norse language, currently teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, previously at UCLA, and as of August 2017, happy to be returning home to the Rocky Mountain States to teach at the University of Colorado, Boulder. I'm back today answering another question from a Patreon supporter. Patreon supporter Scarpheaven, appropriately named, asked me for my opinions, my favorites from the Icelandic sagas and from their characters, and which ones I think most authentically represent the Viking culture. Well, I'm going to turn this into a somewhat broader question like I've done with some other questions and introduce the Sagas of Icelanders. So, during the 1200s and 1300s AD, there were numerous sagas of many different genres written in Iceland. In fact, the word saga in English comes from Icelandic saga, which originally just means something said. In modern Icelandic, it can have a very general sense, something as general as story, or it can also mean history. But in the special sense in which we use it in medieval Iceland, we mean long prose narratives. And the Sagas of Icelanders are very special inasmuch as rather than celebrating mythic heroes like the Saga of the Volsungs or the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok do, both sagas that I will have published by September in my contemporary English translation, the Sagas of Icelanders, instead of celebrating these mythical people, celebrate sort of action hero, frontier heroes of early Iceland. The Viking Age serves for medieval Icelanders much the same purpose in literature as the Old West serves Americans in literature and movies. It's a time to look back on when men were men and life was an adventure and people were honorable and they fought a lot. I routinely teach classes in the Sagas of Icelanders, and in fact it will be a class that I regularly offer at the University of Colorado. Some of the sagas that I typically teach include Egil's Saga, which tells about a Viking who begins his killing at a very young age, as well as his poetry at a very young age. Egil is kind of a jackass, and he has a tremendously successful life, but he is also a wonderful poet. Some of the best skaldic poetry in Old Norse is preserved in the Saga of Egil. I think that Egil's Saga is perhaps the one that I would pick as the most authentically Viking, because much of the poetry attributed to Egil is apparently just as old as it says it is, from about the 900s when Egil was supposed to be living. Another great saga is Njol's Saga. This is a multi-generational saga. Two of the great heroes in that saga include Gunnar of Hlíðarendi and, of course, Njol from the title. Personally, I think that Kori, from the very end of that saga, when he goes on his vengeance ride for Njol and his sons, is one of the most dynamic, impressive, and authentically Viking characters in Norse myth. In Norse sagas, excuse me. Another important saga is Laxdæla Saga, the saga of the people of the Salmon River Valley. This saga concerns also several generations, but focuses mostly on a woman named Gudrun and on her successive husbands, including Kjartan, who is a really prototypical Viking hero, although with touches of chivalric influence. I also like Gisli's Saga, which concerns the outlaw Gisli, who has to hide out after he has to murder his brother-in-law in revenge for his best friend, who was also his wife's brother. And so he becomes an outlaw and he has to hide out, and it's a pretty exciting short saga. I also typically teach Gunnlaug's Saga, the saga of Gunnlaug Wormtongue. Gunnlaug is well named because he composes many really biting poems. And of course his name became the name of Grima Wormtongue in J.R.R. Tolkien's fictional world. I would say that any or all of these sagas contain very authentic looks at least what medieval Icelanders thought their Viking Age ancestors were like. And certainly Egil's Saga, in preserving very old poetry, Njol's Saga has some old poetry too, do even preserve words that probably date back to the Viking period. All the sagas that I mentioned can be found in the Penguin Classics collection called Sagas of Icelanders. That's what I usually teach with, except for Njol's Saga, which can be found on its own in a Penguin translation by Robert Cook, which I recommend. From the wilderness of the American West, I'm wishing you all the best and thanking you for your interest and questions.